All right, everyone, we'll get started here. Day two of the Wells Fargo HealthCare Conference. My name is Derek Archuleta. I'm one of the senior biotech analysts here at Wells. Very excited to have our first fireside of the day with Argenx. From the company, we have the CFO, Carl Gubitz, and also the Global Head of Corporate Communications and IR, Beth Del Giaco. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Maybe just to get started, it would be good, maybe, Carl, just to kind of give us the state of the business. You guys have had a lot of things going on with the launch of Vyvgart, recent CIDP data, all that sort of stuff. So maybe, kind of just level set us how you started the year and where we are today.
Thank you, yes. So let's look at the report card. What we promised you in the beginning of the year, and how are we comparing against that? First, on commercial, we talked about consistent and gradual growth. I think you might have seen our Q2 revenue number of $269. That was 24% growth over Q1. So we still see that consistent and gradual growth. I think the team executed really well. In terms of geographical expansion on the commercial side, we do have approval in China. That happened in end of June, I think. We have shipped inventory into China that is expected and ready to go. So commercial sales in China through Zai Labs, our partner, will start any moment now. In terms of Europe, we said we will agree a price with the German authorities. We have done that. That price will be public in a week or so. I can tell you today that price is higher than the US price. Both the gross price is higher and the net price is higher than the US price. That's Germany. We said we will add other markets. As we sit here today, we have a price in Italy approved, and we will start commercial sales now in September. That price was approved in the beginning of August, but August is a really quiet month in Italy, of course. Other markets in Europe will be added. So the geographical expansion is going well, with Canada still on track to be approved by year end. And of course, we also signed further distributor agreements in South Korea with Hancock, so adding another market to our global presence. In terms of formulation expansion, we said we will get sub-Q approved in the US. We did that. It was approved in June. In July, we launched. We call it Vyvgart Hytrulo, and we can talk about that a little bit later if you have questions. On the clinical side, we had the data on on 117. Empasiprubart is a compound's name. It's our C2 blocker. That's also in June. And then in July, of course, we had the CIDP data readout, which was, I think everybody is aware of that. We, of course, had different scenarios, and we hit the bull case. That was a really very good result from a clinical study. Really proving that CIDP is an IgG-mediated disease. On the back of that, we went back to the street and our shareholders. We did another financing round. We raised $1.3 billion with the greenshoe. So today we have over $3 billion in cash. Really a strong balance sheet to execute our business plans. And our plans have, of course, increased. Our ambition level have increased due to the higher conviction following the CIDP data readout. All of those things which we said we would do, we did do. And looking forward to the rest of the year, of course, we have 2 further data readouts, and we can look forward to consistent and gradual revenue growth.
All right. Well, a lot to chew on there. So maybe starting with Vyvgart and the launch in MG, I guess as you think about the buckets of growth there, you guys have talked about the ex-US expansion, which you kind of just alluded to, so maybe we can dig into that a little bit. But also the move to earlier line therapy, and then now you have the sub-Q Hytrulo adoption. So as you kind of think about these different buckets of growth, I guess where do you see the most acceleration? What's going to kind of like dominate kind of or be the dominant growth driver, over the next 12 or so months?
Now, the U.S., of course, is the biggest part of our business and will continue to be the biggest part of our business. And to continue the growth in the U.S., we need to continue with getting the more refractory patients. It's important because that patient pool has not dried up. There's still a lot of patients there for us to go after. But the bulk of the patients, of course, are on the earlier lines. And we have made inroads, but we're only scratching the surface. That is where the bulk of the patients are. And I remember that we did the study, 20% of patients only had mestinon as a prior treatment. So the study was designed that way. It's in the label. Payer policies allows for it. And now with the experience which the docs have, the safety profile, which is really building up, we should be able to accelerate into the earlier lines. Many of those patients are in the community, so we need to get to the community neuros. A lot of education to be done there. And of course, the sub-Q, which is a 30 to 90 seconds push, will really help with those patients. Because we're decoupling the patient from the infusion chair. Multiple sites are opening up, sites of care. And as Karen, our COO, puts it, we're democratizing the treatment of MG with sub-Q. I think that will be, in terms of dollar terms, the biggest growth driver. Then I think also China, where we're going to launch any moment now. Of course, the number of patients in China is staggering. There's over 100,000 patients in the MG registry. That's a lot of patients. So today, we're only in the private market in China. I say we, Zai Labs, our partner, of course, is doing the commercial efforts for us. And hopefully next year, we will get on the NDRL. That will, of course, coincide with a price cut, as it always does. But all of that still needs to be negotiated. I think we will see revenues from there, but at the moment, we need to wait for that NDRL and to see what the price impacts would be. This year, in the private market, of course, the revenues will not be that material. And then the geographical expansion. I mean, the German price is really important for any company. As you know, the German price is fully public. The gross, and there's a mandatory discount, but that's also public. Everybody knows it. And what many other European markets do is they say, okay, well, let's take the German price, and then they negotiate a confidential discount, which we will, of course, not disclose. And that kind of helps to get access in all these other markets. So I think that's really important. And the last comment I just want to make, that with sub-Q, we have launched, it's a butterfly needle. That's the first generation. It is administered by a healthcare professional. We are working on the pre-filled syringe. We will, of course, aim to get that as self-administration. We are not specific on the timing, but again, that is another piece of innovation illustrating that at Argenx we really know that we have to continue to raise the bar. We're first in class. We believe we're best in class in terms of efficacy. We do have a huge safety database building up, but we need to continue to innovate. And one of the ways we're going to innovate is through the devices and formulations.
Got it. I just want you, can you expand on the German pricing? And just one, is that unusual to see that pricing be higher than the U.S.? And then second, in the past, you guys had talked about, Europe not being maybe a huge market, maybe that even Japan for MG would be bigger than, some areas in Europe. Is that thinking changed now that you have kind of a public price or soon to have a public price for Germany, and that might reset some of those initial assumptions higher?
So I think, first of all, our team did a really good job to get a price which will be disclosed, illustrating the value of VYVGART to society. The total impact on the healthcare system was a fantastic job. If you look at the categorization, we were a significant benefit, which was the second highest category you can get in the scale they use. For that price, there are analogs, there are examples of prices above the US price. but not many. Typically, it's lower. So I think the team did a really good job in explaining that. But I mean, yes, kudos to the team, but also I think at the end of the day, the team can only do so much. It's about the value of the compound. And I think the German authorities saw that value and they recognize that in the price. So we're very pleased with that. I think in terms of Europe, long term, we of course are bullish. We think it's a sizable opportunity, and we're really excited to be in Europe and to promoting it ourselves. But it will take time. I mean, the other markets, many will take time for them to come online. Will Europe be bigger than Japan? I mean, yes, it will be.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. And then maybe talking back to Hytrulo and SubQ, obviously you guys recently launched that. Any kind of like early insights there? Is the early usage being driven by switches or new patients coming on therapy? That would be helpful.
Yeah, so we launched in early July. The launch is tracking. It's going well. We have patients. We're selling vials. The big hurdle, of course, is the payer agreements. We have signed payer agreements. We're making progress. Typically, the payer agreements which we do sign is essentially a copy and paste of IV. But what we do see in terms of the payer agreements is that there's probably a less urgency with the payers, because if you want Vyvgart, you can get Vyvgart. You take the IV. We still think around 2 quarters we will get them all signed up. We're now approaching the end of the first quarter. So we're making progress. I think on that side, in terms of the patient, when a patient, in the discussion with the patient and the physician, they have to choose IV or SubQ. And then the physicians and the physician offices would know that the SubQ might not yet be approved for that patient, the payer side of it. Then typically they go to the IV and say, well, I'm not going to deal with all of this. I'm just going to give you the IV. So we do get patients. In terms of is it new or switches, that's a good question. I don't know that answer. I think that's something which we'll look at the end of the quarter and maybe can talk at the earnings call. But the launch is going well, and the feedback from the market is really good.
Now that you're so far into launch with IV also, I guess how does the adherence to therapy look so far? I mean, or is it still too early to really understand that? But it'd just be interesting to see, like, is it consistent with what you kind of saw in the clinical trials?
You mean specifically for SubQ?
No, for IV, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, for SubQ, it's too early to really comment on that because people are just patients aren't just in their first cycle. For IV, remember before we launched, we talked about that $225,000 the annual cost for a typical patient. And in that is the number of cycles, which is around 5, the number of doses per vials per dose, which is depending on your weight, is either 2 or 3, all the gross to net assumptions, and the value-based agreements which we signed with the payers. That took you down to 225. What we see in the real world is those numbers, of course, move a little bit, but in general, they are aligned with what we saw in the study, and that 225 still holds. Essentially, what I'm saying is it's still valid.
Got it. Maybe last question on this, and I think this is the question that probably you get, or maybe annoys you the most, but in terms of now you're run rating at almost $1 billion in Vyvgart sales, when could we expect Argenx to actually put out formal sales guidance, and what factors, really kind of need to be kind of input into those numbers? That, again, I think you said earlier this year, there's still a lot of variables and factors that, we don't have answers to. Now you have CIDP, you have some other things. So when does that start to, kind of come into the picture?
Yeah, I think there are still too many variables out there. If you think about China, yes, we were going to launch in China soon. We don't know what the price is going to be. China could be big, China could be small. The European expansion, we need to add those markets, indications. So I think there are still too many variables out there. And I think what we as a company need to do is to deliver growth. We understand that, and we're focusing on the growth drivers. I talked about geographical growth, indication growth, formulation growth, and the earlier lines in the US. Those are the four levers. And I think let us focus on that. And once all these variables starts to mature, I think would be a good time to talk about revenue guidance. We will probably give cash burn guidance or later, at the beginning of next year, so that people have an idea of what the net number will be.
Got it. Understood. Maybe shifting gears, as you noted in the earlier remarks, you got two readouts coming towards the end of the year, one in pemphigus and then one in ITP. So maybe we can kind of tee up maybe the pemphigus readout and kind of just a little bit around the study and that population and ultimately some of the proof of concept data that you guys have already generated from the phase 2. That would be helpful.
Yeah, so pemphigus is our first indication in our skin autoimmune blistering diseases. And we did have a phase 2 data set. It was an adaptive phase 2. So we were able to learn a lot about, the drug in pemphigus, how to dose, how to kind of dose on top of steroids, learn about what physicians and patients were looking for in this disease. It's a really serious disease. I mean, they suffer from skin lesions, they suffer from steroid burden. So what we really want to do with our study is to show that we can drive fast onset of action, a fast time to disease control, a fast time to complete remission on a low dose of corticosteroids, and then to actually taper patients off those steroids to a minimal dose, less than 10 mg per day, and to see if we can do this in a sustained manner to show some element of durability in those data. So with the ADDRESS trial, we have moderate to severe pemphigus patients, newly diagnosed and relapsing. They all start on they're randomized 1-to-1, and they all start on still a low dose of corticosteroids, so 0.5 mg per kg per day. And they're dosed weekly, and once they hit, a sustained end of consolidation or complete remission, there's a set protocol for steroid tapering. Ultimately, we want to get patients to what we call CR-min, so they have to show complete remission, no sign of skin lesions, for 8 consecutive weeks and on a minimal dose of steroids. And I think, should we achieve that, that would be, a strong value proposition for the patient and for the physician, given the current treatment landscape of pemphigus.
Can you talk to, the amount of steroids these patients typically take just to control their disease? And, is it even possible for these patients to achieve, C-min on a low dose of steroids?
Yeah, so like I said, because of the nature of the disease with skin lesions, these patients are at high risk for infection. So getting the patients to disease control where there's signs of healing of the lesions and no new lesions forming is incredibly important. And, often the patients are on a very high dose of steroids. I mean, what I've heard from physicians, patients, is sometimes as high as 100 mg per day. So the ability, you can imagine what the burden comes with that type of steroid dose. So the ability to get them to a minimal dose would be really important. It's going to be a high bar to achieve that primary endpoint, and I think it will be very difficult for placebo patients to do that. So we do expect in the trial for the placebo response to be quite low.
In the earlier data sets, did you see any differences between how, patients or efficacy for patients between naive patients and, I guess, more experienced patients, coming into the trial?
No, I mean, in the first study we ran, the patients were mild to moderate. We wanted to establish, safety profile before, dosing further. And in this study, they are moderate to severe. We have, no reason to believe that regardless of where you are kind of in your treatment paradigm on that PDI score, that you wouldn't have the right to respond to FCART and be able to, achieve CR.
And based on the trial, I guess, how do you think about the opportunity? Obviously, you're looking at moderate to severe. Is this something that you think would you be used first line? Rituximab is the only drug that's approved there. It's highly effective, but I guess where do you kind of see it fitting in the treatment algorithm? Ultimately, how do you think about the opportunity there commercially?
Yeah, we see, really nice positioning in the pemphigus market for Vyvgart. I think driven a lot by that fast onset of action, but also the safety profile. As I mentioned before, I mean, these patients are at high risk of infection, and so the ability for us to have a targeted therapy against those IgGs rather than necessarily perhaps suppressing B cells, is important for those patients. And actually, this has become even more important in a post-COVID environment. So we really see this fitting nicely into, early line where you can drive really fast to disease control and then on the low dose of steroids to CR.
Gotcha. And then also just in terms of polypharmacy, so I know some of our checks that we've done with docs, they would look to maybe use, almost in combination with rituximab as early, treatment, get the patient under control because of the rapid onset with Vyvgart, and then doing more longer-term treatment with rituximab. Is that, a realistic scenario, or do you think that, again, patients would be dosed weekly or periodically with Vyvgart? Like, how do you kind of think about the kind of chronic therapy with Vyvgart in the pemphigus, patient population?
Something exciting that emerged from the phase 2 is actually we were able to see patients who had long-term remissions, and they were able, they sustained these remissions even off therapy. And we went in and then looked to see what was happening at the B cell level for these patients, and we recognized that they had a reduced number of the autoreactive B cells, so those that are producing the autoantibodies in the disease. This is very exciting. It's still early data, but from our perspective, if we can drive fast to disease control, fast to complete remission, beyond a low dose of steroids, and drive durable remissions, it would put into question the need for additional therapy.
Do you track the antibody titers in those patients just to see do they the IgGs remain fairly low if you're having that impact on B cells, or?
Well, the normal B cells remained stable.
Okay.
So actually IgG's levels were okay. It was just the autoreactive B cells, which is interesting.
Okay, cool. I guess in terms of I don't know, benchmarking pemphigus relative to some of the other opportunities like ITP, MG seemingly is massive, but again, where do you kind of feel like this looks like in terms of some of these other markets and other opportunities?
Yeah, so I think, MG, I think, will be our biggest opportunity, and as I think we will see the market expanding there. In terms of the derm franchise, if I look at the US and I look at the claims data, 19,000 patients in the claims data, as Bev said, it's really a severe disease, and with our mode of action and fast speed of onset, really think that we can get a sizable market share there, and then just behind that, bullous pemphigoid, which of course is the older, frail population where safety is so important. And again, if we can illustrate that, and that is bullous pemphigoid, of course, is 2-3 times bigger than pemphigus. The derm franchise, I think, is underappreciated by the street, and is going to be a real a big opportunity for us. I think bigger than ITP probably, and maybe not as big as MG, but certainly a sizable opportunity.
Interesting. And then you kind of went to my next question. So from pemphigus to bullous pemphigoid, I mean, how, again, similar are those diseases, and, should we think that success in pemphigus should be success in bullous pemphigoid?
Yeah, so from a biology perspective, we have equal conviction in bullous pemphigoid. It's a very well-characterized autoimmune disease. It's a bigger population than pemphigus, but the patients are elderly and more frail, which is why we started with pemphigus in that skin blistering disease franchise. This is, I would say, pemphigus data, bullous pemphigoid is one of the indications where another indication does actually de-risk it because of the similarity with biology. So once we had those phase 2 pemphigus data, actually the derms were coming to us and suggesting that we look at bullous pemphigoid. There's a real, like I said, it was a sizable population, and there's a real unmet need. These patients suffer a lot from steroid burden because that's all that's available to them right now.
Got it. And maybe just shift gears to ITP. I know you already have one successful trial there with the IV. Anything that we should be, looking for in the sub-Q trial later this year? And I guess you just want to confirm in terms of the alignment with the FDA on submitting on those 2 trials, the one IV and the one sub-Q for approval.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke to the FDA as we always do. So, I mean, we think that the 2 studies, of course, are registrational. It will be the 2 studies, and the sub-Q is exactly the same as the IV. We just increase the amount of patients to increase the powering, because you'll remember the IV study did hit the endpoint. It was successful, but it was not by a huge margin. So basically, to de-risk the sub-Q, we increased the patient number. But other than that, the studies are identical.
Gotcha. And then just in terms of that opportunity, so you kind of seem like, that might be one of the smaller ones, at least out of the first four. Is that, has something changed in that market, or is it just because when we got the data for IV, maybe it was not as good as you expected? I guess, where do you kind of feel like that will be playing a role in the ITP landscape?
I still think it will be a good opportunity for us. And I think if you look at MG, we think we should be first line. And as I explained earlier, I think we've got the right to say that. For CIDP, based on the very strong data, we can take the IG companies on and be first line. For pemphigus, bullous pemphigoid, again, the same story. We should be first line. I think we can beat rituximab. In ITP, the TPOs, we are not going to displace the TPOs. The TPOs work well. And also, by the time we launch the TPO, at least one of them will be generic. So the payers are going to put us behind the TPOs in any case. So I think that is basically why the street think maybe this is not such a big opportunity. But I still think it is a really good opportunity, because if you look at the TPO refractory patients, around a third of the patients are TPO refractory. And then once a TPO stops working, they typically go to the next TPO. And when the next TPO, there's also the drug from Rigel, which is doing okay, but not great. But that's got seems to have other issues. Let's just say that. So I think for us, putting it after the first TPO, to prevent, so that you don't cycle through the TPOs, new mode of action with our safety, fast speed of onset. I think over time we can build a good, strong franchise there.
I mean, do you see Vyvgart being used similarly, from a dosing cycle perspective in ITP as MG? Is it going to be more periodic, or is it going to be weekly dosing? And again, how does that inform the overall kind of, pricing, strategy in ITP, given there's a lot more competition and there's a lot of different price ranges?
Yeah, so I think TPO was dosed chronically in the study, but also if you look at the responders, 90% of the responders were dosed bi-weekly. And also, typically your hematologist would, once you hit a certain platelet level, they will start tapering off. My point is, we think patients will be either dosed weekly or bi-weekly, and not for 52 weeks. You will be tapered off. That's one of the reasons why we believe that the MG price, which we have around a vial price around $6,000, as you know, that price will also work for ITP.
Gotcha. Okay. Look, we're 30 minutes in. I haven't even asked anything about CIDP yet. So
I know.
Times have changed.
It's a new miracle.
Well, speaking of CIDP, so I guess obviously stellar results. Any updates in terms of interactions with the FDA or that meeting, and then kind of next steps there in terms of the submission. That would be helpful to just know.
Yeah, so what we've said is that, internally we're going to be ready to submit that sBLA by the end of the year. And one kind of gating event for that is to have our meeting with the FDA. It is on the calendar. It hasn't happened yet. But I think that from a preparedness perspective and a data robustness, we will be prepared to file by the end of the year.
And since that data's been out, and I'm sure you've interacted with a lot more physicians and KOLs, like any kind of notable or interesting nuances from the data that started to come out, from physicians or comments, and just ultimately again how you think about positioning that in the market eventually, in I guess sometime next year.
I mean, let me start and then you add, Biff. What we heard from physicians, of course, first, it's clearly an IgG-mediated disease. That's the first thing which is being discussed. The second comments are always on the study design, but we've set a new benchmark in how you would do CIDP studies. And then the third comment is around, this is a game changer. We hit the bullseye, the best case scenario, and it really, we should be able to take on IG head-on for the first-line patients. Those are the comments I think we hear from docs.
I think also just, we've talked about this before, but from, the efficacy perspective that Carl mentioned, I mean, that these data, we expected kind of a response rate like Plex, but really what we saw in the trial was a response rate that looked like IVIG. And so that was exciting to the KOLs. From a safety perspective, I mean, this was dosed weekly, and the safety profile is very clean. I mean, I think that would be a real, improvement for current therapies. And then also just from an addressing treatment burden perspective, this is a weekly injection. We will be evaluating biweekly dosing as well in the OLE. And so that's, the 30 to 90-second injection, I think would also be a strong value proposition to the patient community.
Yeah. And just remind us, we're going to get some more data, more granular data, like a medical meeting at some point, right? Like, I don't know if it's this year or sometime next year. Have you guys?
Yeah, we haven't said when. Our primary concern there is to make sure we get the top CIDP doctors in the audience. The feedback from our KOLs is that these data deserve to have that big audience. And so we need to figure out what that meeting is. And then, that's where we'll present the full data set.
Got it. Maybe the last couple of minutes here, just more broadly on like strategy. I mean, obviously you talked about 15 by 25, a lot of indications. You've started many trials. You're starting, or going to initiate some trials. I mean, we're seeing a lot of success with VYVGART in multiple indications. Now you've basically de-risked 4, more to come, probably next year. Does 15 by 25 become, 20 by 30, 25 by 30? Like, how far can you take this in terms of the different indications? And, as you continue to learn more about the drug and de-risk it, when does that kind of come to a head? And ultimately, when is Beth preparing another R&D day for us to go through all that?
I thought we talked about this last night.
Let me start, Beth, and you please add. So I think as a company, we understand that efgartigimod is a unique asset. It's a type of asset which builds companies. The opportunity for efgartigimod, and I look at the totality of opportunity, all the indications we already are in, and others which we will add, makes this a really big drug. It should be a really big drug. In terms of, yes, today we are on 13, we talked about 15, and we are working on other indications, and we will announce that, I don't know when, but pretty soon we will announce those indications. I think a discussion which, I mean, and again, I'm a CFO here, I'm not a scientist, but if VYVGART works for IgG-mediated diseases, I don't know how many times it needs to be proven that it works for IgG-mediated diseases. We're going to put it in 15 studies. I don't know whether it's going to work in all 15, but I think it's probably going to work in many of them. And then I don't know. Do we need to do more than 15? I think we will have to see. We are looking at bigger indications, maybe indications which we can do fast. One thing which the company did really well, and this was even before the IRA was announced, is starting the indications very quickly and very aggressively, not sequencing them. Starting at the same time. That turns out to be a really good decision because with the IRA clock, you can't wait 3 years and then start a study which is going to take 4 years. You're going to run into the IRA clock. If you want to do more indications, you need to start those indications pretty soon to make sure that you get the appropriate return for your investors.
And then on the R&D day piece, I will just end on this. I mean, we are a company that was founded based on an antibody engineering breakthrough. So we are rooted in science. We're data-driven. How we select our VYVGART indications is, looking at literature of IgG-mediated diseases. We like to inform our investors and analysts on why we've selected indications, the biology rationale behind them, the market opportunity. So you can expect to see more of those. But I also think that an event would be a nice opportunity to showcase some of our other molecules. 117 data we have next year. We're really excited about this molecule. It's, grade A antibody engineering. big, opportunities that would fit really nicely within our franchises. And we have additional molecules as well, 119, and a pipeline of future assets that are coming up.
All right. Well, we look forward to that. Well, we'll leave it there. Carl, Beth, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you.
All right.